So what's good, TMG fam? It's your boy L, and I'm back with another reaction. How y'all feel? Welcome back to the channel. Salute. So listen, man, if y'all been rocking with me for a minute, you know how much of a huge proponent I am, fan of the military, bro. I just have the utmost respect for the men and women who have served and are currently serving for our country, man. I just tons and tons of respect for them. You know what I mean? And I've always tried to make sure I displayed that I had that type of respect for them, right? So I'm thinking today, I was like, yo, let's do some Mr. Nightmare today. It's time for some Mr. Nightmare. It's time. So I pulled up channel, I'm looking through the videos, man, and I'm like, what are we checking out? And I come across this video, right? And basically what he did is he put a poll out to his community, his subscribers, and the description reads, it says, these are 3 stories submitted by subscribers after I asked those of you who are serving or have served in the military to send me your creepiest experiences. All right, so the title of the video is the 3 scary true military stories. All right, we're gonna get into them. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button, man. And at the end of the video, everybody, you know what to do. Run the lights up, run the lights up. Let's go.
My dad served in the Vietnam War from 1960 to 1962. For the longest time, he didn't tell anyone outside of the family this story, but he's in his mid-80s now, and he doesn't care about me sharing it with anyone. Not that I intend to release any of our names. I've heard this story told by him 5 times now, and each time I learn about new details he hadn't mentioned the time before. He didn't like to tell this story for obvious reasons, I think. Not only is thinking back to any of those events probably traumatizing, but also he would always say he felt it would be an inappropriate family gathering discussion. My dad did a lot of things in the war. At one point, he was what was known as a tunnel rat, which was a soldier who performed underground search and destroy missions, usually in underground tunnels. My dad and 2 of his comrades were crawling through a deep tunnel, expecting to hit a booby trap or run into an ambush, but the tunnels were surprisingly empty and silent. My dad describes the experience of crawling through the silent, dark tunnels as bone-chilling and adrenaline-pumping, as the fear of instant death at any moment would linger. My dad and his comrades heard a faint yelling and crying sound further down the tunnels. It was of a woman. As they crawled deeper into the tunnels, the cries and screams became more clear. And it was obvious there was...
Now, I would think that was a definite setup. I don't know why, but that would have been the first thing that popped into my mind. All right, this is the trap, or the booby trap we was looking for. That's the setup there.
The woman screaming for help. The 3 picked up their pace, worried of a potential hostage or a prisoner situation. As they continued to crawl through the tunnels, the cries for help got a little louder and clearer. They arrived to a small room that they could slightly get off their knees in. The ceiling was just high enough to half stand, half crouch. There was a small table with a lantern on it that was still lit. There were also 2 broken chairs and a locked safe box with some metallic objects that would rustle around inside the box when shaken. Aside from that, this small room was empty. However, the tunnel continued past this room. So they continued deeper into the tunnel, but the screams for help had stopped at this point. My dad described this horrible, familiar stench of death that soon became overwhelming in the tunnels. They entered one final room with no further tunnels. My dad still refuses to describe everything that was in this room in detail, other than there were multiple bodies, and they weren't killed by just bullets. They looked as though they'd been mutilated by some kind of creature. One of the bodies was that of a woman. The scene was so horrible that my dad and the 2 other tunnel rats had to turn around and flee. They had no explanation for what could have done what was seen in that room. When they crawled back out of the tunnels, they started hearing the cries for help from that woman's voice again. My dad says he and his comrades froze and looked at each other with wide eyes and obvious fear in their faces. They had made it to the end of that tunnel. There were no living things from there to the end of it, yet those screams for help were coming from the direction that they just were. They picked up their pace even more. My dad was in the back of the group of 3, and he says he would look back every 10 seconds, thinking he was hearing sounds from behind him, fearing he would see someone or something approaching from the darkness. They made it back to the surface eventually, and marked the entrance with a flag that signified to his team that the tunnel had been searched and cleared. Most tunnels would be interconnecting as a means of underground transportation and cover, but my dad says this tunnel was unusual to abruptly end. He says it was easily the most gut-wrenching, horrific, nightmare-inducing thing he'd experienced in his entire 2 years in Vietnam.
So you don't have to like report that? I'm pretty sure you probably did report that, right? I'm not in the military, so I don't know. Like, wouldn't they have to kind of, I guess, report that, right? You found bodies mutilated in there. And then a voice of, sounds like a little girl screaming, "Help me." But at the same time, I get it too. You're like, I ain't going back in there, bro. I just felt like that was a setup. Like, that's probably how the other bodies were there. They heard that same voice, probably went to check and see or help somebody and got to where the voice was, and it was somebody playing a recording and just killed them, is what I'm thinking. I don't know. That just seemed extremely weird though, didn't it?
My basic training for the Air Force was at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas. After that, I was sent to Shepherd Air Force Base for technical school, and after my graduation, I received orders to McGuire Air Force Base in New Jersey. There, my job was aerospace mechanic at first. I started on the night duty, unfortunately, so my sleep schedule was basically non-existent. My duties basically were lugging plane parts like anti-ice valves, igniters, ignition exciters, sensors, and more from the warehouse to the flight line. It was for the most part boring, repetitive work, especially at night. A lot of sitting around and playing games on my phone, but nobody heard that from me. It had to be like 4 a.m. at this point. I was waiting for the other guy to come drop off some parts to the flight line. He'll be referred to as Mark for the purpose of the story. I was waiting by the back cargo area of the plane we were working on at the time, sitting on a box scrolling through my phone. Mark was taking an incredibly long time with his delivery, so I shot him a few texts. When they went unresponded to, I tried calling him a few times. The calls rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. I figured he was either screening his calls, lost his phone, or was just very busy at the moment. I waited and waited, and he never showed up. Eventually I got a call from Mark's number, so I picked up, but it wasn't Mark's voice on the other end. It was some random guy. He sounded like a grown man in his 40s. He said he saw I tried calling a few times and said he found this phone on the ground outside of the base. I described what Mark looked like and asked him if he had seen anyone who may have resembled him. He said he had not. It's not like he would have been allowed on the base, so my only option was to drive out there and meet him. I asked him where he was, and he gave me the name of a nearby joint where I agreed to meet him. I walked to my car, which was parked in the closest parking lot, and I drove off the base towards the place he told me to meet him. While I was mid-drive, I remembered Mark was sharing his location with me. Long story, but we basically met these 2 girls this one night while off base who we separated from each other with. We, as a joke, started sharing our locations with each other in case we got quote-unquote murdered, as we kept joking. We joked about it mainly because we met them at a sketchy dive bar, but I'm not about to get into that. The place the man on the phone told me to meet him was called Tara's Tavern in Cookstown, the closest town to the base. I pulled up the location of Mark's phone and it checked out. It showed Mark's phone location right next to Tara's Tavern. This begged the question, what was that man doing there this late? At this hour, the place wasn't open, and there were 0 cars on the road. I pulled into the little parking lot and parked. I stepped out and called Mark's phone again. The guy picked up, and he spoke in a noticeably lower voice now. I told him I was in the parking lot of the pub, and he said he was as well. He said in almost a whisper, "I'll be right over," and he hung up. It was weirder in the moment than it sounds explaining it. I looked at the location on my phone to see if it was updating, but it seemed the location of Mark's phone was in this small patch of woods about 200 feet long and 200 feet wide. I tried calling again, and
Yo, this dude, yo, bro, you got all the signs. All the signs, man. I'm so glad you're able to tell this story, which means you didn't die, but you're extremely, from what I can tell so far, lucky, fam. You have all the signs of what could possibly go wrong. The pub is closed. Why I want you to meet him at the pub? Then he's he's whispering to you. Why is he whispering? Then it's like he's in the woods. Like, the signs are pointing to get out of there.
It went straight to voicemail. I looked around the whole parking lot but didn't see anyone. I was all alone. Not even an occasional passing car. I looked to the woods when I heard something over the sound of the crickets, like someone's footsteps. And then I saw a man. It was him. He was standing just behind the tree line between the woods and the parking lot. He called to me, "Are you alone?" And the sight of him, only his upper body visible, it was freaky as hell. I called back, "No, why?" as I inched my way closer to my car. This was one giant red flag. He called back, "Who are you?"
One? Fam, how many have we already counted? Huh? How many did y'all count? I just listed mine. How many did y'all count so far? Come on, this is one giant red flag. No, bro, we done picked up on several.
Closer to my car. This was one giant red flag. He called back, "Who are you with?" I didn't answer that. I got in my car and drove back to base. I called my supervisor and told him Mark was missing and someone was hiding in a patch of woods with his phone. My supervisor told me he was with Mark at that moment. He told me to meet them at the small building by the flight line. I met with the two and told them once again what I witnessed when tracking his phone. Mark told me what happened. While off the base, he was approached by somebody outside of a 24/7 convenience store, asking for a ride back to the base. Mark believed that he was actually in the Air Force at first and let him in the car. But as they were driving, the man asked Mark to pull over by the woods so he could pee real quick. Mark obliged for some reason. As Mark was pulled to the side of the road by the same small patch of woods by Tara's Tavern, he wasn't paying attention for a minute, and his door was opened by the man. Without a second to even react, the man was grabbing Mark's arms and squeezing them as he tried to pull him out of the car. Mark said he kicked at the man's groin area until he let go. He dropped his phone and it fell out of the car during the struggle, but as he was free, he drove the car away with the door still open at first. And next thing that happened was he went back to the base to talk with our supervisor. We of course called the police and all went to Tara's Tavern to check if the man was still there. The location of Mark's phone was no longer popping up on the map. It's possible the man destroyed the phone. All we did was file a police report. Some people out there are actually crazy and dangerous. Who knows what he would have done to either of us if he had gotten us in the woods.
He almost had them both. He almost had Mark with that situation of him picking him up, giving him a ride back to base when he thought. He almost had him, bro. He is extremely lucky. He was more closer to him than the other guy. The other guy made it to the parking lot and finally realized, like, something ain't right here. But Mark, he lucky to be alive, bro. And y'all be careful, man. I say that all the time, man, especially coming from being a trucker. You cannot trust. And I know it's hard to say, bro, because you want to do the right thing because you have a big heart, you have a huge heart. But people pray and take advantage of those of us who have huge hearts and want to help people, man. They prey on us. They take advantage of us, man. So it sucks. You got to be guarded like that. You have to be if you want to survive out here.
During my days as a Marine, I had many different jobs on site, but my least favorite was graveyard patrol. At one point, I was one of the few with the overnight graveyard patrol shift for a nearby memorial cemetery. As you would imagine, it was a pretty slow shift with not much going on. Oddly enough, even though the cemetery was in a remote location surrounded by dense forest on each side, and I was working the literal graveyard shift, I found the job more relaxing than scary or unnerving. I would be the only—
You know that's how they give you that job, right? They're like, we need you to work the graveyard shift. Literally. I'd be like, no. Literally, I'm not doing it.
one in the cemetery, and my relief would come around 4 a.m., which would be the end of my shift. So this had to have happened past 3 a.m., nearing the end of my shift. It was on this otherwise regular night that I was patrolling near the perimeter fence where some of the older headstones were. I wasn't allowed to be on my phone. If I were to be caught with my phone, I would be reprimanded. Even though it was unlikely to be caught since there was no one else really around except for me, I tried my best to follow that rule. So it was just a lot of walking around and looking at old headstones. But anyway, while patrolling past some of the older ones, I began to hear a woman's humming. It was this very calming, soothing kind of humming, only I wasn't calmed or soothed, because nobody was supposed to be in the cemetery, so it was more so a cause for concern. I started following the sounds of the humming. It was coming from behind this intentionally planted line of thick trees with vines and brushes sprouting for the sides of them. Instead of walking around the long wall of trees, I squeezed through the vines and bushes to the other side, cutting myself in the process. As I struggled to make it to the other side, the humming suddenly stopped as quickly as it started. I was left alone to the silence once again, not even the sound of a cricket. I walked closer to the edge of the memorial property, by the woods, near a few of the big mausoleum-looking structures, and I could distinctly hear some kind of buzzing sound coming from one of them.
I've always heard quiet means something's about to happen. When all the animals and bugs and insects stop making noises and you hear the silence outside, oh, it's time for you to get up out of there, bro. Something is about to happen. I've always heard that. Let me know if y'all have ever heard that.
I stepped up the 3 white steps into the structure. The little door didn't have any kind of locks on it. I'd never been in any of these structures until this point, and I was incorrect in my assumption that they were mausoleums. I still don't know what the purpose of them were. Maybe some kind of memorial building for deceased veterans in the cemetery. As I was inside that cold, dark structure, I could actually feel the hairs on my arms begin to stand up as I got goosebumps for reasons I wasn't sure of just yet. That buzzing sound was coming from inside of the structure, but it almost seemed like it was coming from beneath my feet. I looked down to the wood floor, and there were tiny round holes in each plank of wood, it seemed. Big enough to look through, but way too dark down there to see what lay below the floorboards. I had an idea. I positioned my phone on the floorboard just right so that the flashlight would shoot light into the hole in the wood, and I would look through one of the other holes. I lay basically flat on the floor with my head pressed up to the wood, one eye closed. I expected to see nothing at all, but I saw what appeared to be the top of a woman's head, and as if she knew I started looking immediately, she looked up at me through the hole. I only saw her face for maybe half a second before I fell backwards and let out a blood-curdling scream. I sprinted back to the parking lot and called the guy who was supposed to relieve me soon, and I told him to meet me now. When he showed up, I tried to convince him that I was telling the truth about what I'd seen in that little building. He entertained me by coming with me to it, and I repeated what I did earlier with my phone flashlight. He looked through multiple holes but saw nothing. I had to check for myself, and he was right. It was just some small, empty-looking space underneath the structure. I spent the rest of the shift with him. I left at 4 on the dot. I know he didn't believe me. I wouldn't have believed me either. I'm sure it's a possibility that it was a hallucination as a result of my lack of sleep. But I also believe it's a possibility that I witnessed a spirit or something completely supernatural. I'd heard so many older Marines and veterans tell of supernatural experiences they had while serving. I don't know who the woman that I saw could have been if it truly wasn't my imagination, but it chills me to the bone to imagine it having been one of the women buried in the cemetery.
So you working out there, bro, your mind start playing tricks on you, man. Working in a graveyard, being out there, you're going to start hearing things that may not be there, or you may hear things that are there. You don't know, man. Your mind it's going to start messing with you, bro. That's why I don't see nobody doing that job for extended periods of time. Like I know a lot of us sit here and like, who even wants to do that job, period. But some people will take that job, but I just don't see, man, your mind will go crazy. And I don't have time for that, bro. I don't. That's just one of them jobs that I pray I never have to ever end up doing, man. Because you never want to say what you'll never do, because I always feel like the universe has a way of humbling you and making you eat those words. You know what I mean? But again, man, salute to our military. Salute to you guys for the great stories. Shout outs to Mr. Nightmare. Y'all get at me in the comment section. Let me know what you think. All right? Run the likes up. And stick around and stay tuned to the next reaction. I'm out. Peace. Y'all stay solid. Hey.